Good morning, everybody. Welcome to meeting 8 of the Planning and Housing Committee. Due to a medical emergency, we're about a half an hour delay. We certainly hope that everything turns out to be okay and the person is in good health. I hope everybody had an excellent summer and is all re-energized to do lots of work that we have coming in the fall. And I want to welcome back the members of the committee and welcome the members of the public here in attendance. And for those in the room with us, the screen at the back of the room provides real-time updates concerning where we are on the agenda and what's coming up next. You can follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the July 3rd, 2019 meeting? Councillor Perks, all those in favor? That carries. And we will go through the agenda right now. So, first item, review of electrical systems at Toronto Community Housing, update on maintenance and upgrade process for electrical services. Councillor Wong-Tam. Review of the terms of reference subcommittee on the protection of affordable rental housing. Move approval by Councillor Perks. All those in favor? That carries. 8.3, Open Door Program Call for Applications 2019, support for 651 new affordable rental homes. We have deputations on that. 8.4, Toronto Municipal Code Chapter 363, Construction and Demolition Bylaw Update. Councillor Perks moves approval. All those in favor? That carries. 8.5, feasibility of implementing a support center for Committee of Adjustment and Toronto Local Appeal Body Matters. We have speakers on that. 8.6, appeals of citywide zoning bylaw 569-2013, request for direction. Councillor Perks asked to hold. 8.7, end-to-end review of the development review process. We have deputations on that item. And 8.8, response to Auditor's General outstanding recommendation regarding Section 37 and Section 45 funds not received in 2008 to 2017 approvals. Hold, Councillor Perks. Okay, and do we have new items? No new items? Okay. So we will start with item 1, which is review of the electrical system at Toronto Community Housing, update on maintenance and upgrade processes for electrical services. Councillor Wong-Tam, you held the item?
Yes, thank you very much. I have some questions for staff. Thank you very much for the report. I just wanted to have a fuller understanding with respect to the maintenance program and the upgrades. Many of the TCHC buildings are of a particular vintage. We're looking at 60, 70, 80 years old, similar to that of 650 Parliament, which is where we saw the catastrophic failure of the electrical system. Are all the electrical systems in TCHC buildings, as reported here, are they all up to date with respect to infrastructure, hardware, and is there anything more we can do to ensure fire prevention?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Through the chair, I will speak, Councillor, from the fire perspective, and actually I did follow up, knowing this item was on the agenda this morning, with the General Manager of the Electrical Safety Authority. From the electrical perspective, Councillor, the General Manager of the Electrical Safety Authority has the utmost confidence in the electrical maintenance systems in the TCH buildings that are owned and managed by TCH, and he wanted me to draw a distinction. They have been part of the proactive electrical inspection with the Electrical Safety Authority for a number of years, and the Electrical Safety Authority has no concerns on the preventative maintenance side for those owned by and managed by Toronto Community Housing. Where the Electrical Safety Authority has expressed concerns and confidence are those contract managed. They have not been participating in the proactive electrical inspections because they are contracted out. And those are similar issues that we have seen with the fire prevention matters. The patterns have been the contract managed buildings have a higher incidence of violations with respect to the fire code. And certainly the Electrical Safety Authority has confirmed throughout this entire process that that is where they see an opportunity for improvement.
And how many of these buildings and campuses and complexes are actually contracted out?
Through the Chair, Council, I don't have that information in terms of the numbers specifically managed by the contract managed companies.
And with respect to the work orders that might be outstanding from some of these electrical audits, in the report it stipulated that there's about 6,000 work orders. How many of them are directly rated to TCHC?
Through the Chair, Councillor, Toronto Fire does not have that information. We don't have the jurisdiction to issue those orders under the Electrical Safety Authority.
Okay. And then with respect to ensuring that we can prevent, if we're trying to do everything we can to prevent electrical fires, to ensure that electrical systems are not compromised, including those false alarms. I know that that's a constant breach. Is there anything more that TCHC owned buildings, whether they're contracted out or perhaps TCHC managed, is there anything more that the corporation can do? Because it sounds to me we've got two tiers of TCHC buildings. One that's owned and one that's managed by TCHC is all in-house, and one that's contracted out. And it seems to me that there's a substandard level of service that's being received by those that are contracted out. Is there anything more that they can do?
So through the Deputy Mayor, Councillor, I will state from a fire perspective, those buildings that are managed and operated by Toronto Community Housing solely have certainly a lot less violations that Toronto Fire have noted over the number of years. So from that perspective, no, they've been very proactive with us. And that was the same message communicated to me this morning by the General Manager of the Electrical Safety Authority in terms of the preventative maintenance. In terms of those buildings that are managed outside of TCH by contract companies, obviously Toronto Fire can't speak to the contracts or any of those requirements, but certainly we have seen a higher proportion number of violations, as has the Electrical Safety Authority, for those buildings not directly managed by Toronto Community Housing.
Okay, thank you. Is TCHC here to answer questions? They are here? Okay. For our staff at TCHC, I want to know, the program that TCHC managed buildings go under with respect to safety audits seems mandatory. But for those that are contracted out to third-party property managers is not. Is there a reason for this service discrepancy?
Alan Murray, Acting Vice President for Facilities Management with Toronto Community Housing. I also live in your ward, so I'm familiar with the area. As part of the RFP for the contract property managers, they are responsible for implementing their own electrical PM program. So it is part of their contract to complete a PM program using the specifications that are set out by TCHC.
So is it a matter of the fact that those third-party contracted out buildings are not following their own program?
We believe that they're following their own program. They are required to submit their full PM records to TCHC when there's a deficiency, and we do review the entire PM program to ensure the property managers are meeting the required specifications and standards to make sure they're addressing any deficiencies. What we are moving towards is to require them to submit the full PM reports annually and to standardize their documentation because they don't have standardized documentation.
May I ask, are you receiving those reports from them? Like, they're supposed to send them to you, but are you receiving them? Yeah, okay.
Yes, they do receive them through the contract managed group, but we're asking them to standardize them so that they're in a standard. TCHC has a standard format that we do our inspections in, and so we're asking the contract managed to now do them in that same format.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher?
What percentage of TCHC portfolio is contract managed?
I don't know that number.
15,000 units.
Well, 20%, 25%. So, and I guess you can't answer, oh, there, Scott's there. Oh, you know the answer.
It's just
Why don't you come up to the table?
Just less than 20%.
that is correct. It's
Just less than 20. And the council passed a motion for TCHC to extricate itself from contract managed buildings. Has that plan been put in place yet? That you
So-
can speak to?
As you know, that motion asked us to develop a plan to transition away from contract management. We have undertaken to develop the transition plan, and as you know, contracts are approaching their renewal date, and we're working with contract managed partners to determine whether or not their performance can be improved to bring it in line with the rest of the corporation.
And this is a board decision or a staff decision?
So we need to work with them to determine whether or not they can come up to standards as part of the process of determining whether or not to renew those contracts.
Do you have any idea the amount of profit that they make in delivering this service to?
I do not.
No? Okay. And who oversees the contract managed buildings? Are they overseen by the same staff that oversee our directly managed buildings, or is there a special group?
So there's a special group inside the division that was known as asset management. As of last week, that operation has been transitioned into the new operations division.
Right, so will there still be a special group, or will that be under the COO now?
That will remain a group reporting to the COO.
Reporting to the COO. Okay, and thank you very much for that. Sorry you had to get dragged up to the
It's all right.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Can I just ask how many fires there are in these buildings, or false alarms compared to other buildings? Can anybody tell me that?
Through the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Fletcher, I don't have a breakdown between the number of fires between contract management buildings and TCH buildings. What I can say is the number of violations we have noted over the last number of years. There is a difference, a higher proportionate number in contract managed buildings than those managed by TCH.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Speakers? Councillor Wong Tam?
Yes, thank you very much. I will just suggest that we move this report along to City Council. I'm not entirely satisfied with the approach of simply adopting the report in its entirety by council. I would like to work with TCHC, Toronto Fire, and the Electrical Safety Authority on how we can actually strengthen what's contained in here. What's troubling to me is Deputy Chief's particular comments and report back that there seems to be a sub-level of maintenance and service when it comes to buildings that are contracted out around the electrical system. And that means that there are at least 20% of those residents and tenants who live in TCHC who could be more directly impacted because of systems that will fail because of poor maintenance and preventative maintenance in particular. I don't know what the particular resolution is right now, but I know that it would be a mistake for us to let this go to council without some proper amendments to making sure that we can bring all 100% of the portfolio so that the Electrical Safety Authority will be satisfied across the corporation with every single unit that's owned by TCHC, regardless of who's managing it, that they're all going to be given the same level of service. I think that we can all learn from mistakes that have taken place, especially most recently in St. Jamestown. It's a community that's just been living with impact after impact. And now that we're actually trying to strengthen the programs around life safety systems for high-rise buildings that started off in privately owned and privately managed companies, I don't think we should excuse ourselves from any of that. So I hope that we can work proactively towards fine-tuning and strengthening this report, because it doesn't tell us to do anything. It says the status quo is okay, adopt it as is. But what I'm reading from this report, even though it's only 4 pages, the status quo is not okay, and we need to do more. Thank you very much.
Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, this report, I'm going to move this report to council formally because it's not technically going there yet. It's just a report for the committee. And at that point, I will ask as well that this report be forwarded to, that City Council forward the report to the Toronto Community Housing Board of Directors. And I guess this means it has to go to council. So I think I'm doing the same thing you wanted to do. That this is really an interesting report. It's very good to know that in our directly managed buildings, things are being managed so well. So I want to thank you very much for the work around fire safety and fire prevention. And it's very concerning to note that in the contract managed buildings that things aren't going as well, that it's left up to the contract managers. So we don't know if they're cutting corners or not. We'll probably do a bit more of work on that when it gets to TCHC. I would note that through our tenant satisfaction survey at Toronto Community Housing, that the contract managed buildings were scored significantly lower, 20 or 30% lower in tenant satisfaction than the directly operated buildings. So the council had made a motion to eliminate contract managed buildings. TCHC is looking at this is incredible kind of weight for moving in that direction, because fire safety, and nobody knows that more than you, Councillor Wong-Tam, when you have a big building, that you have a compromised fire system and what happens there, such as the one you had on Parliament, right, 650? And that could happen in any of our buildings. So the other thing that's interesting and doesn't connect to this is just the number of false alarms that are coming from Toronto Community Housing and how we're managing that. And I'm not sure if we asked for that before, but I'm sure we'll find a way to find that out to manage the false alarms. And just thank the staff for their vigilance around fire safety, both TCHC and also our fantastic fire department. And Mr. Jessup, you're always on the job. Thank you very much.
Are you finished, Ms. Councillor? Okay, great. Ms. Fletcher. So I would just like to thank staff because when I was talking to staff before the meeting, and I was being told that actually most of the buildings at TCHC, their electrical service is way better than the average of the city. So that's good to know. It is disappointing to know that our outsourced managed buildings are not up to par. So I think that there's a little bit of work to do in there, and I think that we're very much interested on the work that TCHC is already undertaking to make sure that we bring everything to the same level of service, and I think that's what I heard from councillors as well. So the report will be moved to council, but we're looking forward to working with TCHC and our fire department to make sure that both our contracted out managed buildings and our directly managed buildings have the same standards, and they're way above par what we have in the rest of the city for once. That TCHC is actually delivering well on this. So with that, Councillor Fletcher moved a motion and the report. If I could have a vote on that. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. We moved it as a package. Is that okay?
You didn't need to.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. So we're moving now to affordable rental homes, and we have a deputation. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
There we go.
Okay.
And you can start.
So councillors, I won't waste your time this morning because I know you're running behind already. My name is Mark Richardson. I am from housingnowto.com. We are a website that was established last year after the mayor made his announcement for 40,000 new affordable housing units over the next 12 years, which is an average requirement that you guys need to deliver 3,300 units of affordable housing every year. That's a really tough number for you to get to, as you are well aware. Over the last 8-9 months, we launched our public open map of the Housing Now sites that were announced, trying to make the information as clear as possible, trying to be as transparent as possible, and also trying to track against the targets. Since we launched in January, we've had over 23,000 visitors to our website. And coming soon to our website is going to be all of your Open Doors history. So every Open Doors site that you have assigned numbers to since 2015. Really, we're just trying to do this because we're finding that getting the information is incredibly difficult. You have to go into different staff reports, different PDFs, scrape information out of TMIS. Numbers and dates that were assigned to these projects in previous years don't always come to fruition for various different reasons. So for a couple of examples, there's the Open Doors site from a few years ago that was at 355 Coxwell. It was supposed to have 33 seniors housing units. That project fell apart. As far as we can tell, we're still counting those numbers in some of the talking points that are used about affordable housing. Yesterday, we were out at 80 Dale, which is going to be at full council next week, I believe. So please feel free to talk about 80 Dale, where you went from 116 units in the original proposal down to 33 in the revised proposal. So you lost 83 units of affordable housing. You only lost 17 units of market housing. This is a site next to a GO station. It's transit-oriented development. So this is a slide that sometimes gets used, and this is a talking point that gets used, that you have 7,000 affordable rental units under development. That's a super fuzzy number because it's really what you have said you're going to develop on these sites. They can be in a really embryonic state in the development process. Things can fall apart. These numbers never seem to get revised down. So the terms underdevelopment and pre-development are fairly unreliable when they're being discussed around here. Until you get to that column that is affordable rental units under construction, until a building permit is physically issued for these projects, we just need to be really careful with how the numbers are being described. So across all the affordable housing projects, Open Doors, Housing Now, the inclusionary zoning plan, all of them are going to require more density than the locals want in order for you to make your math work. That's pretty clear from every Housing Now meeting we've been to, from the Open Doors meetings we've been at as well. You need to be painfully transparent with your site-by-site information to earn public confidence. If you're not painfully transparent with it, what happens is the locals in their Facebook groups and their neighborhood flyers take your lack of detailed information and misuse it to run down your projects before your meetings ever happen. And I'm sure some of your councillors have experienced that. And we need to address the failures of these projects, the reductions as they happen, so we can correct them as we go forward. So I'm great. I'm so happy you got 651 units here today. But as all of these Open Doors projects move forward, we need to put meaningful numbers and have some way, either put it out as open data and we'll do the tracking, or you guys need to create user interfaces that are much more user-friendly in order for people to be able to have quality information about your affordable housing programs. Otherwise, you're going to become the victim of misinformation. And that's my time.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? No? Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Very helpful as usual. Okay, questions of staff? Oh, sorry, is there anybody else that would like to speak on this item? Okay, we have one more speaker. Oh, sorry, I didn't recognize.
Hi, my name is Adine Kachera, and I'm the manager for Riverdale Cooperative Houses. I was to provide a lift to Helen Powers, who's on the list today, and she called me early and was not well, so I just wanted to pass along her message. Helen lives at one of the buildings that is one of the 651 units of affordable housing. It's slated for redevelopment, and she is a member of Riverdale's committee for this housing development. She wanted to thank Councillor Fletcher and city staff for helping to move this project along and to build affordable housing where it's needed. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on this item? Seeing none. Questions of staff? Councillor Perks.
Thanks very much. I guess to the Affordable Housing Office. So I've taken a look at the different, what are they, 8 different proposals here, and I've divided them into nonprofit and for-profit and tried to calculate how much public subsidy we're giving to each type. And it looks to me on a per unit basis like the average subsidy for a not-for-profit is $87,000 per unit and $548,000 for the for-profit. Is that in the ballpark? It looks like it's about a 6-to-1 ratio.
What's the question, Councillor?
Am I correct that we're subsidizing for-profit on a unit basis about 6 times as much as we're subsidizing not-for-profit?
Across the 651, there are more private sector proposals being funded.
I'm asking on a per-unit basis.
On a per-unit basis, my calculations show that the average of the 215 nonprofit, the total subsidy is 18.8 million, is 87,000 per unit. And on the private sector, the total subsidy overall is 31.8 million at 436 units, which is 73,000 a unit. So we're subsidizing the per unit cost of the nonprofits higher than the private sector.
Okay, well, we're going to have to sit down and do our math together.
I'd be more than happy to do that with you.
The one telling thing, though, is that the for-profit units are for shorter durations, 30, 30, 40, 30, 50, whereas the not-for-profit are 99 years. So if you take the subsidy on a year of housing basis, it's wildly skewed in favor of the for-profit. Is that correct?
And so the affordability period, we increased from 25 years in this proposal called a 30. And yes, we are getting longer affordability with the nonprofit organizations.
Which means that in terms of years of affordability, the amount of public subsidy is much higher to the private sector than it is to the not-for-profit sector, correct?
Councillor, with respect to the nonprofits, they're also getting property tax exemptions that extend beyond the 30-year period.
And on a net present value basis, accounting for that, the subsidy per unit year to the private sector is much larger than the subsidy on a per unit year basis to the private sector. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Any other questions? Councillor Bradford?
Thanks very much. And through the chair, noting on page 9 of the report, it says that we received a total of 20 applications. I guess my question is, do we have a sense of if this is higher or lower than previous years, and what we can do to maybe increase the number of applications that the city is receiving?
Councillor, it's in keeping with the range of applications that we've received in previous years. What we have done for the first time in this report is we're recommending some funding for those applications that came from the nonprofit organizations that we're not in a position to recommend to you today, but we're recommending $50,000 to each of those organizations to perfect their applications and come back next year. So we're looking to scale up the number of the Open Door program, but recognizing that all of these projects are coming without any federal or provincial funding. So this is the extent of what we can achieve in the absence of federal and provincial housing funding.
Okay, so if 20 is sort of the ballpark average that we've had over the past number of years, and you're coming forward next year with supports for those applications, is there a target or a goal in mind of how many applications we would like to receive and how many we would like to be supporting?
Prior to the Housing Now initiative being introduced, we were targeting 1,000 units a year. And so I think from a staff perspective, we'd like to get to 1,000 units, recognizing as well that next year is the last year of the Open Door program, and City Council has a decision to make as to what that program looks like and whether it would be continued.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you very much. Just following up on the agreement terms, there does seem to be a discrepancy with respect to some agreements being 30 years, others going as far as 99 years, and I know that there's other policies at the city that actually have even less of a term lock-in, about 20 years. Why is there such a wide range of this of options for the developer, and why do we not just try to be consistent and go for the 99 years, the longest term possible?
Typically, in these instances, a 99-year term would be something where the city would have owned the land or the land is owned by a nonprofit organization. We have not factored in instances here where land has to be purchased, and so that is, if you will, a drag on the projects insofar as the economics and the ability to make them work. So I think we could go back. We are having some discussions with planning as well with respect to inclusionary zoning as to whether there could be a consistent term limit, if you will. But all things considered, as I indicated, we moved the minimum term from 25 to 30 years. And we could look at extending that further if that's council's direction.
And then for those sites that are actually privately owned, but drawing upon the financial incentives of the city, there seems to still be a range of around 30 to 50 years. Why is that? Why does that discrepancy exist?
The proposals that come in, it's a competitive process. And so each of the sites compete, and we make decisions based on what the financial request is and whether it's reasonable against the term of affordability, the depth of affordability, also the unit sizes and also the unit mix. So it's a lot of variables go into the decision making as well. It's not like it's a competitive proposal on one site where we get to measure all the same things. They all have their own particular circumstances.
For the privately owned sites, will those units be, the strata remains, the ownership remains with the private developer? Have we ever tried to secure ownership, so therefore it's stratified and then conveyed to the city?
So through the Open Door program, that's not been a feature of the program. In particular, stratifying and the city owning the units essentially would come at a higher cost than what is being paid to achieve these units, because in transferring the ownership, you would be looking at paying all of the costs associated with the building as opposed to essentially prepaying through the Open Door program for an affordability period.
Would we not simply be paying for the leasehold improvements and the build costs, but not necessarily land value? Because the land value is fixed. If they build 50 stories or 60 stories, if 15 floors goes to the city, the developer still has their density, plus the financial incentives that we've offered them. Would it not make more sense to try to obtain the ownership, so therefore we can have affordability in perpetuity, as opposed to a family, and 30 years go by pretty quickly, especially for those who are in need of fixed affordable housing. Is it just something that we haven't started that conversation, or is it pushback from the industry? Have we thought about how we can secure more, buy more, without having to buy the land? Because this sounds to me the best way to go about it, because we are already financial incentives are already in. If we go that extra distance, when we just secure it?
So, Councillor, just in response to your question, we would estimate that if the city was to own the units, it would be double the cost of what the incentives were, and you'd achieve 300 units as opposed to 600.
But then we would have them in perpetuity. We would never.
It's a question of, through the chair, it's really a question of how we're able to achieve as much housing as possible. But if you wanted ownership, then you would be looking at a deeper capital and financial commitment from the city.
So
And
right
fewer
now-
units.
Yeah, so right now, we put in approximately 60,000 to 100, and that you're averaging out, let's just say 60,000, we'll use that number, but after 30 years, it's gone. But you're saying that if we double that cost, let's say $120,000, or even triple that cost, $180,000, we own it, and after 99 years, it's still within our inventory.
Councillor, through the chair, at the current moment, the city is purchasing some units within private developments, and we're paying in the range of about $350,000 a unit.
Yeah, yeah, okay, thank you. Which is,
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, I just want to follow up on that, where circumstances where we are able to purchase a floor or a couple of floors within a private development when it's already being built, are there scenarios that would be friendly to that, or scenarios that make that easier, perhaps when some type of city property might be involved?
Through the chair, there are development companies that are quite happy to partner with the city where units can be included and purchased within an existing or within a new development. By way of example, a month and a half ago, 80 new residents moved into the Aqua Vista project on the waterfront, where the city owns 80 units as part of a larger condominium complex.
Sorry, we own 80 units. The city owns them as part of the, I didn't hear you.
As part of the larger condominium complex,
The
we
larger
own 80
condominium.
units, and
And who administers those?
they're administered through, in this case, it would be Artscape, who has a 50-year lease with the city, but the units are owned by Toronto.
And so in that circumstance, just to look at these really interesting ways to do things, Artscape has a 50-year lease on 80 units, but the units are owned by the city in that building.
That's correct.
How many floors is that?
My recollection is there are probably about 8 floors,
8? Oh, 10 a
including
floor.
a community
Yeah.
space.
And that's made possible because it's Waterfront Toronto project, or there's land that's involved there?
No, through the chair, the land was land owned by the city of Toronto.
So once the land's owned by the
So we
city-
leveraged the value
Correct.
and the city's ownership of the land into acquiring a part of the project as affordable housing.
So that was part of the development agreement?
That's correct.
In addition to the deputy
And
mayor,
the city, through the chair, the city paid the developer to construct those units.
and in addition to the deputy mayor, it is part of the waterfront housing plan to provide 20% of the units in the waterfront, so that manifests itself on various sites over time.
So this is part of a bigger plan? And were there, okay, that's an interesting model. And of course, we have our red door model, where one floor will be owned by the city, or a section of the building will be owned by the city.
That's correct.
But there's no time limit on that. That's just city-owned, that floor.
Through the chair, yes, that's city-owned, and it was paid for by the city as well.
And we paid for that. And that is, will be administered, we'll own it. The red door will have the lease on it. And that one is, they'll be moving in shortly. And they had one extra, we gave one extra floor in order to achieve that city ownership of that space.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Yes, that was through, the city initiated that, right? In order to achieve that, the city initiated that, Mr. Cadden? city initiated the official plan amendment in order to achieve that? Red door.
I'd have to defer to the chief planner.
I believe so. There was an application, but we worked with the applicant to achieve that through a policy amendment.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Councillor Perks?
Yeah, on a different aspect of this, so here in this report, it's proposed that we exempt $25 million in fees and charges and $12 million, well, $13 million, that's the net present value of property tax exemption. In terms of the fees and charges, that's development application fees and development charges. Is that what that is?
Through the chair, it would be the development charges, planning application fees if they hadn't already been paid, and building permit.
And building permits. Okay.
Only for affordable units.
Only for the affordable units. Very good. So we still have to have building staff do their work, planning staff do their work, and we still need to build the infrastructure for the increase in population. Is there a specific way that the city replenishes the accounts for that lost revenue?
Through the chair, it's been recognized since these fees and charges exemptions were instituted by the city in 2001, that these projects essentially wouldn't otherwise get built, and as a result, there is no mechanism to charge back or to compensate those divisions, but that's been a long-standing practice of the city.
I understand
And
it's a long
Councillor
practice.
Perks, I'm just going to remind you that we're discussing the allocation of the funds, not the program. The program has
I
been...
understand, and this has to do with the allocation of the funds. We're making a decision to do something.
We've made the decision of $250 million
I understand.
back a few
and
years ago.
I am asking
just-
about, there's actual money that we're being asked to approve here.
To specific
Asking
projects.
about how it works, okay? So to the chief planner, when in your department, as I understand it, development review is paid for completely out of fees, development fees. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So this here takes $12 million out of that. How do you compensate?
It's absorbed.
It's absorbed, which means that you have less money to do planning generally when applications come into the
Councillor Perks,
$12 million as a result
With all
of
the
the
respect, I
decision-
gave you a second round
As a result of the
of
decision that's in
questions.
front of us right now.
No, the decision has been made. We've allocated $250 million to be allocated to different projects. The decision we're making today is which projects are going to be receiving those allocations. There's going to be a time that we're going to be reviewing the program again, and all
Recommendation
those
number
questions
3.
are going to be very
Recommendation number 3 in
pertinent.
front of us, if I can read it to you, is that City Council authorize the Executive Director, Housing Secretariat to exempt developments described in Chart A in the financial impact section of this report from the payment of development charges, building, planning, and parkland dedication fees.
Councillor,
So we are actually making that decision in this meeting.
we've made the decision as of
So you're gonna have to
$250
either
million.
rule my questions out of order, in which case I'll challenge you.
Okay.
Or I will keep asking.
So I will rule them out of order, Councillor.
Okay, I challenge your ruling.
Okay. Vote to upheld the chair. All those in favor? Thank you. Chair is upheld. We can move. Is there any other questions? Okay. So I do have some questions. There was a request to have a third-party value for money evaluation of this program as we're giving to different projects. I don't see it in front of us today. Are we going to have it at council?
And B. Barry Lyons do a third-party assessment, so that can be made available.
So can you please make it available directly to council? Do you need a motion, or is that?
No, that's satisfactory. I will do that.
Okay, great, thank you. I want to follow up on actually the presentation that that Mark Richardson did on the availability of the information. Is there a possible way, and I think that Councillor Bradford is thinking of putting forward a motion, is there a way that we actually can have this information available, where the projects stand, how are we doing on the planning process, how do people apply? Because I'm sure all of us get these questions, you know, in our offices as soon as the projects become available. So is there a possible way that we can have this as soon as possible up and running?
Through the chair, yes, we're able to do that, and I can also say that the data that we have is being updated, so where projects do not proceed, they are taken off of the list and not counted.
So would we be able to have a very easy, understandable map that could have all this information where the application stands? And I know that we have these as part of developments, but can we have one on the Open Door and Housing Now sites that actually, or work with the nonprofit sector to actually make these available to the public?
Yes, we're committed to doing that.
Okay, great.
Just to supplement Mr. Gadden's comment, the Planning Division does maintain the Application Information Center online that includes virtually real-time information on the status of applications across the city, and it has been recently enhanced to include reference to all the materials that have submitted to the city. So it's a pretty robust platform.
It is, it's fantastic, but I think we need to actually
focus on that.
emphasize, or maybe it should be there, but just marked as an open door and with a bit more information. I think that between planning, housing secretariat, and maybe some of the advocates, we can actually come up with some really good information tool for the public.
Councillor, just by way of clarification, the open door projects that are being funded or being recommended and go through the process, it's the creation of a pipeline of projects, and so the city is making a multi-year commitment to them. A number of them may not even have made a planning application. They may have had a preliminary review of what their proposal was as part of what we do, but they're generally multi-year projects in terms of execution. And, you know, it's not surprising in the environment that we work in Toronto and the real estate environment that people do their business, that some projects may not proceed. It's, you know, that's to be expected. We would love to come back here next year and recommend more projects in front of you, and we would love to be recommending more nonprofits.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. Speakers. Councillor Perks.
Thank you. So I have a motion on this item. That City Council direct the Executive Director of the Housing Secretariat to include a proposal in the November 2019 Housing Opportunity Report which guarantees that subsidies to not-for-profit providers are at least equal to the subsidies to for-profit providers. Mr. Gadden and I still have to settle our math, but we did get an agreement that if you think about a year's worth of housing, in the report in front of us, we are giving more money to the for-profit applicants than we are giving to the not-for-profit applicants. One thing we have all heard many, many times is that not-for-profit housing providers in the City of Toronto are struggling to find the capacity to apply for, you know, building more affordable housing in the City of Toronto. And a large part of the reason why they don't have that capacity is because they're mission-driven. They do it on paper-thin margins and try to make sure that every dollar they get goes into the housing. As a result, the capacity isn't expanding. On the other hand, the for-profit guys, we seem to be guaranteeing their profit margin. It makes no sense to me that we would be spending public money on housing in an imbalanced way like this. And I want to understand how we can rebalance it better. The other consequence, of course, is that the not-for-profit housing providers tend to be providing, you know, housing in perpetuity, 99 years, and we know that when we get to the end of the 99, they roll it over. But the way we've structured it, with the 30-year term, at the end of the term, we just, effectively what we've done is kick the affordable housing can down a generation. When all these 30-year proposals run out, we're going to be in another crisis. So I think if we can think about how to better rebalance the way we're spending public money so that we're not, you know, encouraging profiteering, but actually encouraging investment and capacity in the social housing sector, we will be providing for a more robust housing program in perpetuity in the City of Toronto. So I hope you'll support my motion.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Bradford?
Can I just question
Oh,
clarification?
sorry, questions of the mover.
Yeah. Is the intent to do the subsidy on a per unit basis?
So I want to get advice from city staff on what's the most rational way to do it. You know, there are a lot of moving pieces. There's the length of term, there's whether we own the land, it's whether there's additional housing subsidies provided given the kind of tenant that's going to be there. I don't want to be prescriptive about how that mathematics works, but I want to make sure that we're spending public money in a fair and equitable way, and in a way that doesn't privilege the for-profit sector over the not-for-profit.
Okay, so they can come back with that.
Yeah, I want their advice
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher?
on how to achieve this.
That, what you just said and what your motion says is not clear to me.
Right. And if I could jump inside Mr. Gadden's brain, I could make it all clear to all of us. But I know I'd fit because it's a big brain. But I'm not sure what mathematics you would use to do this, and I want to see it calculated out so that I can understand when we're evaluating projects, what's the right way to make sure that we're not inadvertently over-subsidizing the private sector at the cost of the not-for-profit sector.
Right.
And if I get some more robust thinking on that, I'll be able to give better judgment when we debate the Housing Opportunities Plan in November.
So you're looking for that information to be included in the HOT plan?
Yes.
vis-a-vis the other two. Okay. I think it could be worded a bit better, but I'll support it.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Bradford to speak.
Thanks very much to the chair. I have a motion here, just very quickly. Appreciate Mr. Richardson's deputation. I thought that was insightful, and we're the same neck of the woods out in the East End. And this is really meant to address some of the topics that keep coming up on social media or in meetings. And I think when we're discussing these sites, the need for housing, some of the larger, more dense projects, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And finding the right information is often challenging for residents. And the best thing that we can do is arm ourselves with accurate, fact-based information that we can share and provide people clarity and certainty so that we're all talking about the same thing. That is so critical on these projects, and I do appreciate the deputation and Councillor Bylaw's remarks as well. This I think will place it in one place and act as a portal for residents to get those facts. I'd also like to thank staff for all of their work on this. I think that you can see in the report we are making good progress on Open Door, especially as we've actually started to move forward with the Housing Now program. These two initiatives together make a lot of sense. And it feels like it's not enough, right? And when we look at our targets over the next 10 years, we have a lot of work to do. But with Housing Now, you've got the 3,700 units across the 11 sites in Phase 1. Of course, we'll be coming back with Phase 2 shortly. And with Open Door, we're now consistently approving around that 600 unit mark per year. And these are good outcomes. It's definitely important progress from 5 years ago when we were consistently missing those targets. So I want to thank a resident in particular in our ward, David Brown, who's been working hard to bring one of these projects forward. And I know it's not an easy process, but we met back in January when he was in the very early stages of working on a project, and I'm grateful for the commitment and partnership that he's bringing to Ward 19, as well as all of the applications across the city. Whether it's public or private or not-for-profit, we all have a role to play in this, in building housing in this city, and it's a critical issue. We can't do it fast enough, and we all have to work together on it. So thank you very much. Hope you'll support my motion.
Thank you. Councillor Wong-Tam?
Yes, thank you very much. I want to just commend staff and thank you for the report. I recognize that you are doing the very best that you can with the tools in front of you and recognizing the astronomical land values that exist in the city, recognizing that there are tremendous development pressures, and we're actually in the market competing with these four market forces that we now know as transnational. The capital is global. And how do you actually extract the most public benefit in those market conditions and that tight financial ecosystem is really, really difficult. And I know that it's not without a lot of attempts from staff to try to be creative and innovative where you can. The one thing I always struggle with, and this is not going to be a surprise, is the term. Is that the financial incentives continue to escalate from the city, whether it's the waiving of the development fees or permit fees, and the fact that we have growing populations that require what will be even more difficult under the changes of Bill 108. We're seeing this diminishing return. It's taking more and more effort to build these community facilities to make sure that the water flows, that the roads are complete, and that the community centers are there and the parks are there when the projects are complete. And on the same hand, those are on the same sort of hand, those are the same tools that we're actually using to give away the incentives. So we're going to build these communities and we're going to say you don't need to pay for the growth. So we're really, in this case, almost moving shells around. And so the tangible benefits and the outcome out of the $50 million investment, whether it's drawing from $12 million plus from the reserve or $38 million of sort of foregone revenues, we're only really extracting 651 units. And out of those 651 units, they're all going to come to some type of term end. Some of them at 30, some of them at 99. Hopefully the ones that are at 99 will continue onward. But it's a lot of money going out and very little tangible, meaningful return coming out of it. So the formula is going to have to be fixed. We're going to have to figure out how to make that fix. And a significant way of making that fix is actually another strategy that will be coming forward from the Crate TO side, and also in concert with Mr. Gadden's shop, is when do we expropriate? And how do we actually expropriate? And we need to get much more aggressive of retaining the lands that we have so we can build as much affordable housing when we actually have the assets, not just a small percentage of 20, but 100% affordable home ownership, affordable rentals on the site, not necessarily home ownership all the time. So we're not diluting the toolbox I already have and weakening it from a position of go, but we're strengthening it and only leading from the front. The fact that the federal and provincial government is remaining to be absent is shameful. And we know that the same program and the same formula that's being used in BC, in Vancouver in particular, city-owned assets, leveraging out to the private sector and working with local community partners, is delivering 100% affordable, 100% rental on all their city-owned sites. The major difference there, as I see it, is that the provincial and federal government are at the table. What I was told by the federal government is that when we start talking about housing, and particularly at the highest level of political office, we will get housing dollars. If we talk about transit, and transit is all we advocate for, and over the years that seems to be the recurring theme, we will get the transit dollars, even if our transit plans don't make sense. They'll still come to the table and say, you want a one-stop subway? Here you go. You want smart track, whether it makes sense or not, we'll just leave that for another day. You can have some money on that. But boy, if we start talking about housing and we don't ease up on the conversation that we have to address the housing affordability crisis in the city, apparently, I've been promised, that's what we'll get. So we're going to have to amplify this urgency and make sure that everything we do at the city is not flowing directly to council unless we get provincial and federal dollars matching it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, I just want to say that this is a great conversation that we're having today, because we're having to grapple with how we're going to build and how we're going to achieve more affordable housing over a longer period of time, maintaining the affordability. And we didn't quite have this pressure years ago when we had the Affordable Housing Committee. Things weren't at the crisis point that they are now, so we are really digging deep into trying to figure out how to do these things. Regarding the nonprofits, I would say that generally they need help. We acknowledge that in the Housing Now report, that they need, I don't want to say, that what they do is they operate housing. They're not builders. And so how do we marry up the nonprofit world, the building world, in order to achieve efficiencies in building, in design, and other things? And having run into a number of situations where the nonprofits on their own have created designs and things that are very expensive per square foot, and we've had some of our development partners step in to assist on reducing those costs. So there are real synergies that need to be developed. I really am serious about this. We said we would try to help increase capacity. One of the projects that's being discussed and we're going to approve today is the Riverdale Co-op. They own 124 units over a large number of sites in the East End. And they started off with a project on Riverside Square, and as this has been going along, in order to achieve this and make sure we can build it, the developer of Riverside Square has partnered with them in order to actually build the facility. It's that type of expertise that not a lot of nonprofits have. When I look at this list, I see Wood Green in there. They have that capacity. I don't know many others that do. And I think Mark Richardson in his deputation mentioned the failed project at Coxwell and Gerard. That may have been too ambitious, not within a framework. So I think we have to really be looking at that capacity issue constantly and finding very creative ways to do that. A number of us went to the talk from Van City Credit Union, where they have inserted themselves in the housing market with financing, but not just financing, but with an expertise level where they're able to now build. And that should be our goal here in order to increase the number of units that nonprofits are able to take charge of and achieve and build on bigger sites. So I know that's not the subject of this, but I do think that always we have to remember that when we're talking about this is very easy to do X or Y. It's not so easy for many of these nonprofits. We have to help them get to that point where they can achieve their housing builds with not a lot of problems and not a lot of crises. There have been so many crises here. Nobody was here, I think you may have been, Councillor Perks, when there was the Ghanaian housing project in Councillor Mamalides' ward that had gone 150% off the rails. That was a telling moment that nonprofits and developers, we need people working together, even in that idea, Councillor Wong-Tam, where there may be a nonprofit that would be partnered with a developer delivering a certain number of floors, such as in the artscape. So let's be as creative as we can in achieving as much housing as we can and as great affordability over a length of time that we can.
Thank you, Councillor. And just like to say a few words as well. I want to start by thanking the applicants because this can only work if we have good projects in front of us, the nonprofit sector, the profit sector, that they're ready to partner with the city. Also thank staff to put together the program and continue to deliver on these proposals. And we've been learning throughout the years, and I think there's some important things that definitely came through this report. The first one is that it was identified that we needed a much closer relationship between the planning and the housing secretariat, and I think that was one of the key things that staff looked for this year, was to bring these things together so that the 80 Dales or the other projects that we've seen sometimes not happening don't happen anymore. We also looked at what projects are close to shovel-ready. That was a very important consideration because the need is enormous in our city. The feeling that we're constantly catching up and not even getting close is, I think, what everybody feels. And so we were really looking at what projects could we make sure that could we help to get shovel-ready. The other thing that is important as well, and that I think it will go a long way to ensure that our learning experience throughout these years is complete is the value for money analysis that the third party is going to be making. I think that we always constantly need to be challenging ourselves. Is this working? Are we getting good value for money? Are these actions taking us in the direction that we want to go? And I'm looking forward to seeing that as well. I do support, and I think it was a great presentation that Mark Richardson did in here, and I'm looking forward to seeing a much more transparent way to follow these projects through. So I am supportive of the two motions that the two members of the committee put in here. Also, because not only we need to be transparent on how these projects are going, how they're being in the planning process, and how people can have access to these units, but also one of the things that this report made sure it happened is that support for the nonprofit sector. As you notice, there's $250,000 that go out to support the nonprofit sector, because as the city has ramped up its efforts to build affordable housing, and the reality is we've never been this invested in the building of affordable housing through funds, through land, through initiatives. The reality is the City of Toronto has never been involved. I wish that the other orders of government could say the same, but I think that in particular with regards to our provincial government, there's still a lot of work that could be done in there. But one thing that we always have as an aim is to strengthen our nonprofit sectors through all these initiatives, making land available, making these benefits available, how can we make sure that our nonprofit organizations are getting stronger and stronger so that they can apply to bigger and bigger projects? So I think that Councillor Perks' way of looking, like, can we look even further? I think it's an important thing to do, but I think it's also an important step that we took forward to support the nonprofit organizations by saying, this application wasn't ready yet, but we understand your challenges and your struggles, and we're ready to come to the table and help you get to the finish line. I think it's an important step that we needed to take forward so that we can get even more partnerships going. So with that said, once again, thank you to the applicants. Thank you to our staff, both in planning, housing secretary, everybody involved, to make sure that we have today 650 units approved and ready to move forward. And thank you for the people out in the communities that keep us on our toes and always challenge us to do more and better. And so I'm looking forward to having this very ready, available in an open data portal so that Mark can have lots of fun with it and let us know how we can do even better. And with that, I'd like to ask for your support for the report. And can we move it as a package with the two motions? Yep. Okay. All those in favor, recorded vote.
All those in favor of the two motions, amendments by Councillor Bradford, Councillor Perks, Councillor Bradford, Councillor Perks, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Bylaw, Councillor Wong-Tam, that motion carries unanimously. All those in favor of adopting the item as amended? Did you want to record it?
Sure.
Recorded vote. Councillor Bradford, Councillor Perks, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Bylaw, Councillor Wong-Tam, that motion carries unanimously.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving on to the next item, which is 8.5, feasibility of implementing a support center for Committee of Adjustment and Toronto Local Appeal Body Matters. We have deputations, John Boston's Federation of North Toronto Residents Association.
Thank you. Right. You have a letter from me that supplements the earlier letter from Jeff Cattell and Cathay McDonald. I'm appearing on behalf of Fontra because neither of them are able to appear today. With respect to the support center, I frankly was surprised by the arguments in the staff report. We believe it's really important, especially with the T-Lab, to try to correct the imbalance that exists between the ability of residents, most residents, and the abilities of developers to be effective before the TLAB. At the Committee of Adjustment, this is not so much of a problem. The Committee of Adjustment has, on the whole, been able to respond to the fact that most residents don't understand the 4 tests, but is able to bridge that gap, and it does a pretty effective job on the whole. We look forward, incidentally, to what I understand will be coming forth in December, the report on the Committee of Adjustment process. I've talked to Mr. Mitzi about this and understand that that's coming then. But with respect to the support center, in the TLAB is a relatively, compared to the Committee of Adjustment, which is relatively informal, the TLAB is anything but informal. It's a relatively legalistic process, which gives huge advantages to developers that are able to afford expensive lawyers and expensive planning staff. You know, the cost of residents appearing before the TLAB is measured in tens of thousands of dollars if they wish to be effective. And if they appear without a lawyer and planner, in general, they are ineffective. A support center can help both in providing information, in helping people understand the very rigid deadlines for submissions, et cetera, that exist within the TLAB procedures. Support center can also be helpful in providing advice as to how to proceed effectively, and in some cases, go beyond that to provide legal and planning assistance. I frankly think that the arguments that were made in the staff report are remarkably poor. The short duration of the new support center that was set up by the previous government leaves us with very little information as to how that could have worked once it got going and became effective. You know, the notion that limited experience provides evidence as to the limited use of it by residents, I just don't think flies. The fact that effective residents might in some cases be arguing contrary to the city position, that's no argument for not providing support to them. I mean, we pride ourselves in this city on public involvement in the planning process. And it is to say that, you know, it would be in some cases contrary to the position that's taken by the city is not a reason to say that we should not support and provide assistance to citizens in making their involvement more effective. And so anyway, the point I want to make is that there are many arguments in favor of trying to make citizen participation in the planning process more effective. The staff arguments, I believe, do not provide a compelling case for not providing assistance, and we recommend that you refer this matter back to the staff for reconsideration. On a final note, there's a rather deprecating comment in the staff report about the mediation, about the lack of use of mediation. I would call your attention with respect to LPAT mediation to the chart that I added on page 2 of my letter, of my supplementary letter. You'll notice that that since the TLAB regime has become effective, there's far more cases that have been settled through mediation and a negotiated process. Mediation can be very effective and in basically allowing residents to make their case effectively on a one-to-one negotiation basis, and that's worked very well both at the TLAB and the OMB. I think it should be encouraged.
Can I ask you to wrap up?
Yep.
That's okay.
It. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none. Thanks for joining us here today, John.
Thank you.
Anyone else that would like to speak on this item? Seeing none. Questions of staff? Councillor Wong Tam?
Yes, thank you very much. And just drawing from Mr. Boston's deputation regarding the lack of activity in the provincial sort of appeal support center, which is one thing that you cite in your report, is that after a year, almost a year, $1.6 million, there just wasn't a lot of activity. Would you say that a year, especially in a year of fluctuating changes in the planning process, big significant changes in even how this the OMB has been rebranded, do you think a year is enough to be able to determine that outcome?
And through the chair to the councillor, in reviewing the year in review report that we have met with the former executive director of the Local Planning Appeal Support Center, and she was kind enough to provide us with her year in review report, which we read end to end several times. They had very conservative estimates for future growth as well as the modest uptake in the first year, and her report actually outlined how their program normalized after a year and how the public was using it. The vast majority of their cases certainly involved planning applications of major planning matters are more complex than those matters that are dealt with currently at TLAB. So things such as official plans and zoning bylaws.
So the forecast from the executive director was that there just wasn't significant uptake, and she did not foresee any additional uptake. Is that correct?
It's a very conservative number. It's very minor increases, and she gave 2 additional year projections in her year in review report.
And was the projection based on the fact that the entire appeal process was starting to change?
I believe the focus of and I can't speak on behalf of the former executive director, but I believe the focus of the Local Planning Appeal Support Center at the province was to align in supporting the primary focus of the local planning appeal tribunals, new legislative changes. So they were both enacted at the same time, and that alignment happened and was normalized in year 1 by the end.
Because I think one of the reasons why the local appeal support center was set up was largely to sort of recalibrate the balance and the power within development sector and local communities and municipalities. So therefore, even though the original changes to sort of reform the OMB and to create TLAB and then ultimately LPAT was to really try to bring everyone together earlier on. So therefore, you're going to front load all your as much as your consultation to sort of get proactive in sort of informing the public of what the intended bill form changes were going to be. You were supposed to bring everyone together. So it really was one additional tool, given the wide range of changes in the Planning Act at that time, to sort of bring everyone together. So I think that particular inaugural year was a year of changes, and changes to actually reduce the conflict, that constant strife where we're butting up against each other. Would that not count for one of the reasons why that particular support center did not see the surge numbers? And the reason being is because now with changes through Bill 108, everything has now been turned upside down on its head again. And that means that municipalities have even less power than they did under the previous reforms, which is to reform the OMB. And communities in particular have even less power than they did pre-OMB, because the OMB is back bigger, badder, just worse. Wouldn't it be now the time to actually introduce this local support center?
Through you, Madam Chair. Important thing to note is that when we interviewed the executive director of the Province's Support Center, we had some focus on relating to appeals to TLAB, the local appeal body. We got a clear message back from the province that a very small proportion, no more than 20% of all the inquiries or work that they assisted people on related to C of A matters. We have to remember, we have 40-plus people in C of A and 120 community planning staff that routinely, daily assist neighbors and others in helping them understand the planning process, what the process is about, and even providing guidance on appeal matters. So we just didn't feel, based on what we got in terms of feedback from them, that it was warranted recreating such a system to assist on TLAB appeals.
Just one final question. I'm just looking at my own, I'm self-monitoring my time. And thank you for that answer. So recognizing that there is, there is a team of staff persons who are there to review the CFA applications, to go through the litmus test, but their primary job is not to go out and educate and provide technical support. That's not what they do. They do that off the side of their desk when they're answering the phones, on top of everything else they're doing, which includes application reviews. Is there no value in creating perhaps an additional either unit or perhaps creating a toolkit of some sort that will actually support the public when they need that additional support? Because I don't believe for a minute that every single planner is on their phone waiting for the public call so they can get down into the weeds to explain the process. They answer questions and then they put down the phone. So the public is still left scrambling to understand the process, where they can actually provide meaningful sort of interventions. And so I think the public is still at a big disadvantage.
Madam Chair, in terms of did the support center that the province created provide value? Yes, it provided some value. What we're saying in this report is when you put it all together and you put it in our context and what is already provided for by City of Toronto staff, we just don't think the cost is warranted, nor is this support center needed. But in terms of your toolbox question, actually the department has actively pursued a number of improvements, some which will be referenced or are referenced in the end-to-end review report that's a later item, where we have tried to increase transparency, improve dialogue with residents, upgrade the websites so they're more interactive, such as the reference made earlier today on the Application Information Center. So we think, in fact, that's a very important objective of the department, to broaden and deepen the availability of options for us to interface with the public. So I think that's been improving over the years. I don't know if you want to add more.
I was just going to add that we are going to be reporting in December on a kind of roundup of various Committee of Adjustment initiatives that are underway and in flight, some of which have been introduced. And we can certainly include in that report an update on our education piece, because I agree with the comment that it is part of the responsibility of the division to provide that educational support, and that manifests itself in various ways. So we'll look to include an update on that in our December report.
Thank you. That would be helpful.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. Speakers? Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And I struggle with this particular report just simply because I know how difficult it is for residents to actually break through the system. And the perception of it always being rigged against local communities is out there. And I think that there was some good moves under the Liberal government to try to, equalize some of the playing power that communities had, municipalities had, and I recognize that all the rules were upended, not just once, but twice and continuously. The planning department is sort of on the heels of their feet, reeling backwards, trying to understand what all these big unilateral changes mean. So this is why I think that this particular support center represented something to the local communities across Ontario that needed to get that additional support. So whatever we can do to offset the fact that the report says we should not proceed, and I'm going to sort of be encouraged by what Mr. Lintern has said, is that if there is a way to create additional supports, make it transparent, but also extremely accessible and comprehensible and usable, for the general public, I think is going to be a very valuable tool for the general public. Because I do know that, for communities that are not as sophisticated or they don't spend as much time through the planning process, development is just happening to them. And changes are happening to them, but because of language or perhaps work schedules, there are a lot of people who do not participate in our planning process, no matter how we try. So the tools we use to bring forward all those communities, to inform them, to empower them, so that they can actually advocate for themselves of what they want, is so critically important. It's an equalizing, it's an equity tool. And so that's what I think the support center could have done if they had particularly put that frame around how they were to carry out their work. And in the absence of that provincial tool and the asset coming forward, it would be great for the city to step up. We're the most diverse city in the world. We speak over 200 languages, and I know there are communities that never will walk through the door here, nor will they walk through a development meeting. They will not participate in our transit discussions because the language and the way we conduct our business is not accessible to them, which means that when we're planning our programs and our services, we're kind of doing it without them. So thank you very much for your answers. I do find them helpful, even if I don't agree with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Seeing none. Okay. On the report, all those in favor? And that carries. Okay. On to the next item, 8.6, Appeals of Citywide Zoning Bylaw 569-2013, Request for Direction. Councillor Perks, you held the item.
I'm not sure if I have to go in camera. I may have to on this. Maybe we could put it off.
To the end?
To the end?
Okay. Yep. That sounds good. And PH 8.7, end-to-end review of the development review process. We have deputations on this item. And then we'll have a presentation from staff. So we'll do the deputation first and then the presentation. John Bossons, Federation of North Toronto Residents Association. John.
Thank you for hearing me again. There is a lot to be said in favor of an enhanced case management system to handle development review. There are a lot of good proposals in the end-to-end review report. I want to start off by saying that. There's no question that development review can be made more efficient, especially by, and that there are a number of good proposals to that effect in this report. We are concerned. I must say that the one thing that gave us a little bit of a chuckle was the notion of extensive stakeholder participation and review without involving the public. It's one thing to say that the stakeholders are the development industry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but a very important stakeholder in the public process is, of course, the residents of the City of Toronto. We were disappointed that the stakeholder consultations did not go through a process of public review apart from this meeting this morning. City planning is a difficult process, and I think, on the whole, the City of Toronto has done an exemplary job of trying to involve the public in the development of secondary plans, et cetera. The problem here is that community planning and community building is not a mechanical process. It's not something that is easily made efficient. And the important thing is that there is a conflict, potentially, between making the development review process efficient in the sense of speeding up the processing applications, and on the other hand, making it effective in delivering good planning. That's the conflict that concerns us. We believe the public has an important role to play in trying to improve how applications fit into the city and into the plans. And we also believe that it's critically important that, that the city devote more resources to planning as opposed to the review of individual applications. Examples, I give two examples of potential conflicts that are provided by Figure 11 of the consultant's report. Opportunities for dedicated staff teams. I agree that things like, for example, public participation, the administrative aspects of that are far better handled by a separate unit handling that than by having the planners having to take the time to do that. However, in creating a separate staff to handle LPAT appeals, if that means that that we're trying to keep the planners that are dealing with an application before it goes to the LPAT out of the process and creating specialized staff to dealing with this, then there will be a loss of information. The planners that will be appearing at the LPAT will not have the knowledge that has been gained by the planners dealing with the application. Ditto with site plan agreements. I'm not saying that these are easy matters to handle. I'm not saying that efficiencies cannot be realized. I'm just saying that it's important to do this in an area in a way that does not result in a loss of a reduction in good planning. The essential point is that community planning is most effective when the community is involved and when community planners are involved throughout the process. A further concern. We're really concerned about the fact that the strive for efficiency may reduce the city's commitment to effective planning. I mean, the big problem here, in fact, is very much emphasized in the first couple of pages of the consultant's report. The number of applications that the city is now dealing with is, right now, is actually 8 times the average number of residential units approved in each of the last 10 years. There's been a huge explosion in the number of applications before the city, thanks to the way in which Bill 139 was handled and with the transition provisions. Well, we can't undo the mistakes that were made by the provincial government. But it's important that we recognize that that's a real problem. The key thing here is that efficiency is not going to be able to undo the fact that the city is not providing enough budgetary resources to city planning.
Thank you, John. Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you again.
And if the presentation could be prepared.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm joined by my associate, Chris Drovalanis from City Planning, and just prepared a short overview presentation of the report, just to give you some flavor. It's obviously a complex topic, and we're, thankfully at the end of the beginning, if I may, in terms of the process of change, which, as you can imagine, is both, and I kind of take my cue from Mr. Boston's comments, we're dealing with something that's both an art and a science, and the focus of this review process has been on kind of the science side of the house, understanding that there is very much a fine art to the planning process in the City of Toronto. The former Planning Growth Management Committee requested a review of the end-to-end process, the planning development review process specifically. I think in the context and spirit of continuous improvement, it's something that all of us include in how we operate and what we think about our business processes here at the city. It fits as well into the city manager's emphasis on customer service. And I would say customer experience and staff experience is something that we're hearing more and more about at the city, and a focus of our work, how those experiences can be delivered and improved. It also represents a focus review of our operating model and its effectiveness. I know many councillors are familiar with the basic model of development review in the city, where we have pre-application, an application, a circulation, a cycle of comments, a parallel process that involves the public, that process informs and supports, and ultimately an outcome which comes before various committees of council for decisions, council being the final decision-making body here at the city, and appeal rights under the Planning Act. That basic system is not affected by this. This is about making that system work better, efficiently, and effectively as much as possible. Taking you through it a little bit, as I said, it's about the operating model and a focus. Many people call it the planning process, but really it's an interdivisional planning process. We have a lot of people involved, and I'll explain that in a minute, but we very much, and I note again Mr. Boston's comment about a focus on the outcomes. We're actually quite driven by the outcomes and don't see conversation about efficiency in any way taking away from the ultimate outcome, which is good city building. That has to remain squarely the objective of any review of the effectiveness and efficiency of the process. We're not putting that aside in any way, shape, or form. But the city does believe in continuous improvement, certainly as in my leadership with the division, it's something that I've emphasized, in fact, throughout my career. The desire, I think, to provide clarity to all the players that are involved, predictability, the transparency, both to applicants and for the public, is very important. And again, continuing to get good outcomes. I want to emphasize as well, because we have been discussing at council this year changes in legislation. We often change policies and guidelines. All kinds of things get changed in the environment of the process. So we kind of put that aside. This is more about the focus on the machinery, come what may, with the various environment planning that we do work in. The next slide just highlights the fact that it is complex. It's interdivisional. In my career, again, I think it's only gotten more complex. In the interests-based planning process that we deal with in the city, 25 city divisions sometimes touch this, 30 external commenting partners. This really underscores the need to look at our operating model to support the most effective way that we can interact with each other. Not all 25 and 30 parties touch everything, but it gives you a sense of the scale and scope and the complexity and the fact that this is much more than the city planning division itself. The process of stakeholder engagement, the focus on the machinery of the system really did focus on the stakeholders that are affected by it directly. The comment about public consultation, I would just simply say that a good development review process supports and informs good consultation. It was not the focus of this review. The division has undertaken work in the last 5 years around consultation practices. We continue to emphasize improvement in consultation practices. So I see these two things as mutually supportive, and certainly any time that we have a consultation process, be it a light one or a heavy one, a good development review process is a backstop to the quality of that consultation. the consultation with various stakeholders who are involved in the machinery of the work revealed this list, quite a robust list of issues to focus on. This is kind of what we heard from that range of stakeholders, including city staff. I'll only emphasize a few of them here, but obviously the interaction of clients, customers, whatever you want to call them, but also the experience that they are having. The experience of city staff is a crucial area of focus and feedback that we got. Value-added work. I've heard a lot from staff over the years. Why am I having to input this data? I would rather be working on X. We hear that a lot, and the focus on having better systems that allows staff to do what they went to school for, or what they frankly enjoy more than punching data into a machine. The whole idea of the way that we support the process with technology and project management skills. The top frustrations, and many of you experience this yourselves, around things that get stuck and people not knowing what to do about it. The extra circulations that frankly can gum up the process, the length of time that results, the inconsistent experiences. And I think we all have to be honest that we have good processes, very, very good processes sometimes, and less than average processes sometimes. So it's raising the level of consistency and all of that, and addressing the frustration that all the players have with it. The next two slides, I won't go through in detail, but they just highlight some of the overarching recommendations that the implementation team will take forward, including entrenching the collaborative approach that we take in a structure and supported by good project management, and in a structure of interdivisional governance, so that when things do get stuck, people are accountable for those issues getting stuck, and that they know where to turn when something is stuck, that the automatic escalation can come in and support them, understanding how we can equip ourselves with, just on to the next slide, what can we bring to bear to make this a center of desk exercise for a team, as opposed to a side of desk. The department has been engaged in continuous improvement initiatives, but this is significant enough interdivisionally that we want an implementation team with a business transformation lead to take it forward. And of course, technology and other supports that are necessary for this thing to work better. I want to emphasize that we often have complaints. Those complaints may be about the fact that I don't agree with the height of that building. I don't call that a complaint. I call that a difference of opinion. This is not about that. This is about making the system work better, so that when we do have differences of opinion, we can have a good, high-quality debate about what that height should be. And I think it's important to emphasize this, because I don't want people to come away with the impression that this is going to fix all of our differences of opinion. We're still going to have them, and you can see why we'll still have them with the list of issues in the no column. But again, underpinning the conversation about the way the city responds to development, it is important to focus on continuous improvement. I can recall a best practices review that was done right after amalgamation, where we ran around and talked about everything that everybody did in the 7 municipalities that comprised Toronto. And, it was a Needham-Gotham exercise, but we came up with a way of doing business. This is the first actual fully comprehensive review since that time. Notwithstanding that, we have made a lot of continuous improvement initiatives. So I think it was time to recast our eyes on the whole affair. Last slide. This is a culture journey, a shift building on a lot of really good things that people in this organization do, but systemizing and modernizing those good things. You can all think of very good outcomes and practices that you've enjoyed over the years. You can probably think of things that you didn't enjoy as much. And honestly, this is about making it all work better for everybody. So this is a bit of the roadmap that leads, that we're headed into in the next year or so as we roll this out. Be happy to take any questions you've got.
Questions of staff? Councillor Perks.
So going to slide 5, there's a piece of this you didn't talk about, which frankly seems to me to be about half the problem, which is application quality. I can't think of the number of times I've had an applicant come in and show me just a block massing diagram and you know, no unit count, no nothing, and say, well, I showed this to the planner and I couldn't get an answer. How do we deal with that problem?
Well, I would, you know, not to be too short in my answer, but garbage in, garbage out. So
I'm going to quote that forever. Okay.
But I think, you know, if that's a pre-application discussion, that might be okay. You know, what do you think? You know, people run things up the flagpole. That's certainly nothing that can, you know, form the basis of an application where people really have to hunker down and understand what's being proposed, especially how it supports a conversation with both technical experts and our citizen planners out there who all have opinions about it.
Right.
So part of it is something that we have in place right now, which is application submission requirements that are very, very detailed. They're backed up by official plan policy. So, you know, the test for staff is to ensure that what comes in meets in a specific way, in a qualitative way, the application submission requirements.
Okay.
And, you know, that is a test for staff, honestly, and it's a test for the applicants to make sure that we've got something that we can rely on to evaluate. We test, for example, we get an applicant's shadow study. We will do our own shadow studies to test that, often topography changes, things like that. So we have to be diligent, even though we may feel that those application submission requirements have been met. We still have to be diligent and do our due diligence and follow up when we discover that, hey, you know, that scale isn't working on that drawing, or that's a mistake. You know, there is a human element to this that has to be monitored and relied upon.
A related and possibly slightly more serious question. One of the places where my experience has been that all the difficulties arise, or the most difficulties arise, is the applicant makes an application, the planning department is very upfront from the beginning, element X of your proposal is going to be a problem. And we sit there and sit there and sit there, and then somewhere towards, you know, as we're getting closer to a deadline, they say, okay, we'll change element X, but we have to adjust Y, Z, A, B, and C as well, and then it has to be recirculated because what they've done affects the transportation, what they've done affects the servicing, and so on and so forth. How do we deal with that?
Well, it's a Rubik's Cube. I don't think what you're describing is that unusual, actually. It's very common. And that is I'll say, the art and the science of what we do. There are inevitably options in that puzzle that you just described that reveal, you know, an outcome that we can all live with, that meets policy, or that is a supportable policy amendment, but that has to be revealed through an analysis of options and, you know, a sifting of preferences and priorities.
So I'm asking, I just don't want to run out of my time. I'm asking something a little bit different. So we have a disagreement about something, and then close to the end of the process, the developer makes a change, but it's, the community sees it, the planner sees it, maybe the councillor sees it, but I find a problem happens when all the other departments have to, on a dime, review all that stuff. I'm wondering, is there a way of being more upfront with applicants saying, listen, it's a Rubik's Cube, and there are 10 different things that have to be thought about, and you can't just change that and have one of the professionals understand it. It has to meet all the tests. Is there a way we can work that better?
Well, the system that we're proposing here has a governance structure with it, so that when that scenario happens, an escalation can take place, and decisions can be made either by an empowered planner with experience or someone with less experience, but anyway, they're backed up by that escalation procedure, so that a decision can be made about, well, what's the extent of the circulation that needs to take place? Which departments are affected by that change? Can we scope the resolution of it? Does it need a full circulation? I think we have to assess. You're going to get so many different scenarios there. If they move a driveway and affect a tree, we've had one of those recently. I mean, we've got to go and talk to urban forestry, and we've got to talk to transportation. Is there another way to do the driveway? It sometimes can happen quickly and turn on a dime. Sometimes you're into another full circulation, and applicants have to be well aware of the ramifications of that.
Councillor Wong-Tam?
Yes, thank you very much. With respect to the report, I see that a lot of it is speaking about changing how you review and working together more collaboratively. What I don't see are numbers. So, by example, the amount of time the circulation process should take, and then what you and where's that documented? So if you start a complete application comes in, clock starts, you circulate to these 25 divisions and 30 external partners. What's the deadline for them to reply? And what happens when the deadline is not met with any comments?
So that's a good question. This report did not go to that level of detail. We have existing operational procedures. For example, on a first circulation, it's a 7-week turnaround for comments from commenting divisions, and we monitor that and report internally on our performance on that. Part of the new system is a governance structure that triggers automatic reflexes when those deadlines aren't met, so that the planner, for example, who's at the center of that, is not left to their own devices struggling for a missing comment, that team involved in that review, everyone will be aware of what's missing, and everyone in that system will be accountable for what's missing, and it will be escalated such that a response is pursued in a more effective manner than maybe it is today. What's missing today is a system that backstops what you've described in your question, and being able to better measure our performance on that in a way that's more transparent. Because I think what happens is, what the consequence of what you've asked is that, the applicant will start phoning, Toronto Water. Councillor will start phoning Toronto Water. We want to work back from that kind of activity to more of a system approach that everybody can rely on.
And is there a progressive lead time that says, okay, 5 weeks in, we're not seeing your comments. This is under the existing system. You've got 2 weeks to go. Is there like a reminder that goes off on the engineer's desk? Oh, I haven't provided my comments yet. Like who's managing the amount of work that's sitting on the individual's desk, and then what deadlines are not being met? Because my understanding is that we don't oftentimes get these comments circulated coming back to us within the 7-week turnaround.
Right, so those are the system layers that have to be, we've got both overall timelines to meet, and individual divisions have their own procedures. Those are the next layers down below this report that as we roll this out, we create a new system, and we certainly will be pursuing those project management, that level of project management effectiveness with every division that's affected. Many of them likely have some of these procedures, maybe some of them don't. So that's kind of the next series of layers down as we get into what is a phased rollout of these changes.
And if a department does not comment, dead silence, do you consider that as no comment?
No, that would be pursued to find out what's missing, or if it is a no comment.
And so then under the new system, when the first circulation deadline is not met, the team comes together and huddles. They hold each other responsible for for what should be the evaluation feedback loop, do they then have to recirculate? Or do they just draw their conclusions and then they don't have to recirculate?
So I think, again, the question's getting into the next layers of how the process will operate, and we have not taken it to that level of the functionality of it. This is the operating model that we are putting in place based on the research and stakeholder engagement that was done. And the business transformation lead and the implementation team will be addressing the issues that you've raised in your question.
Thank you. So my final question is a little bit on top of what Councillor Perks commented about, is the quality of the applications. Oftentimes, developers will think that the clerk has started simply because they've shown you some very vague image. Even if they haven't submitted anything, and even if their submission is not even complete, they will start citing of, I looked at a parcel of land 3 years ago, I started to think about buying it 3 years ago, I've been working on this application 3 years ago, how is it taking you so long to give me comments, and why is the city holding up the process? Time by showing us vague little drawings, like little blocks on a piece of paper, and having us to meet with them, and like, how do we hold them to account so that we're actually all going to be working professionally and together, right? So we want to review quality applications after they go through their planning rationale. We want to be able to then, only when they're ready to actually show us something viable, that we meet with them.
So just to reflect on the question, there would be some benefit in a pre-application process. We already have a pre-application process, but we're thinking that there would be some benefit in putting some rules around that pre-application conversation so that it doesn't perhaps go on for years, that there is more quality information that we can rely on in a pre-application conversation. At the end of the day, though, I can't sit here and judge the motivation of a proponent until really they file with the city and make it official. That's when the clock really starts, and that's what we're hoping to be improving, at least on our side of the ledger. We looked at a sample size of, I think it was maybe 40 or 50 applications in 2017, and we saw that average processing time around 18 months, because they never, a complex application usually runs beyond a year, but that really 9 months was on the city and 9 months was on the applicant. And, so I'm focused here on, making our 9 months work the best it can, understanding that it's a bit of table tennis that goes back and forth. But whether an applicant decides to sit on something, change, sell, change their business model, change their direction, I can't rely on that. When observations are made by the industry recently, about 11 years, you may recall. I don't understand that comment, because really what I feel we should be judged on is what we're responsible for on our side of the ledger and making that work, the best we can, understanding that this is a very complex process. Whether someone decides to conceive of a project and it's completely their business what they do on their side of the line.
Thank you.
Yes. First, I just want to say all the steps that you've taken to date over the last number of years. You've taken simplified language. The signs are different. A change is coming to this site rather than the very officious looking, just listing a bylaw that wouldn't attract anybody's attention. So that's just part of this overall. This is the next step, really.
That's right.
Modernization.
There's a whole modernization initiative over the last 2 years. I can go over 14 different incremental things that we've done to make it all work better. We've gone from, for example, 20 paper plan circulations to 0. In the next couple of months, we'll get to 0. So there's a lot of things that we do anyway because we love continuous improvement.
But your interface with the public has really become far more sophisticated over the last number of years.
Yes, we've what we call growing conversations, which is a whole effort to do that differently and better, and we'll continue to do that.
I think if there's one place where in development that ends up being frustrating, I know for me and also for our residents, it's the transportation planning aspect of the development application. And there, I don't know if it's because of lack of staff or there is a tendency to simply rely on the traffic study that the developer has submitted, which I think it's fair to say, you might agree, that that's always going to be in their favor, that everything can work. So I don't know if you would agree with me or not, but because of the traffic concerns, Vision Zero, and many of these other things, do you think that there's a potential of having a far more robust review from our own staff of the transportation studies that includes a different lens other than just, yes, technically you can build that, but that places it in a neighborhood context, a Vision Zero context? Would you think that we're actually operating at that level now, or that that could get better?
I'll just comment that we currently, in our application submission requirements, I believe, have 2 transportation-related reports. One is a more narrow examination of functionality, and one is a broader lens. So there's room in the platform that we have now, I think, to canvass the issues that you're describing. I think what's really important, and I know that Ashley Curtis is here from Transportation, but what's really important at the beginning of an application is to identify the scope of the issue that needs to be canvassed. Many of our neighborhoods, I know, whether it's Bayview in Eglinton or whether it's Carlaw and Dundas, many of our neighborhoods have different dynamics to be taken into consideration when it comes to transportation and traffic planning. I'll maybe turn the floor to Ashley, but I think you're identifying the importance of scoping and focusing ourselves at the beginning and to capture the issues that need to be reviewed through that process. And sometimes, and we know this happens, especially where we have a concentration of applications, where we have to kind of take a time out and go and do some traffic work because maybe we don't have that data or we don't have an understanding of what's needed, and then come back to the application and be clearer about what the solution is. I don't know if, Ashley, you want to add to that?
Thank you, Greg. Yes, through the chair. So I think the simple answer to your question, Councillor, is yes, we could do better. The focus previously from transportation has been quite narrow. One of the outcomes from our fundamental divisional review, which we've undertaken, is to look at restructuring, as you know, a number of sections within our division, of which development planning is one. So as an example, currently development planning and traffic planning, the team. So we've removed the traffic planning component from them to enable them to focus solely on the development planning function. We're also building in increased training for staff so that they can look increasingly from a multimodal and multi-level perspective at each of the applications. So yes, we fully recognise we've got some work to do. We're committed to doing that work, and we will get there, and we're committed to working with Greg and his team to give the best service we can in response to these applications.
So you're reviewing how to basically increase that breadth or scope of how you're reviewing the traffic, the situations?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct, Councillor.
And not relying solely on the applicant's traffic study?
Absolutely not.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions? I do have a few. So when do we expect to have the business transformation lead in place?
In response, the competition is underway currently.
Okay, so eminent.
Shortly.
Okay.
Before the snow flies.
And how are we doing also with our hiring? Because I remember a few months ago, asked about the number of vacancies in the department. It was quite high. So how have we been able to catch up on that? How are we doing on that?
So our vacancy rate right now is sitting between 8 and 9%. We have 41 vacancies, and every one of those vacancies is involved in a current process or competition.
So I'm listening to you and to Councillor Perks at the same time.
Oh,
So 8 and, sorry, say that again.
Running between 8 and 9%. We have 41 vacancies right now.
Wow.
Every one of those vacancies is involved in an open process or competition. I checked those numbers just this morning thinking that I might get asked.
Okay, great. The other thing is there's obviously a technology component that is going to be needed in here. If we want to, so when do you expect to have something? Are you going to try to have something in this budget process? Like, how can we make sure that things are moving and that the requests are coming through?
So it's very much an enabler. We can take this only so far without improving our technology that dates back a couple of decades now. It's an important part, especially for the way that we do our business and the building division, who both rely on the same platform, the IBMS platform. A little, even though MLS uses it, it's less of a dependency issue for them. And we are working with information technology now in a review of what technology options we've got going forward. They have been made aware of the dependency that we have with this project and technology, that we can, again, only take it so far. And we're actually, I believe, going to be partnering with buildings on some pilots or prototypes of some of those new technology options very, very soon, I believe.
Okay. With regards to the circulations and the timings, so you said you have internal reports. I don't think this committee is ever made aware of how we're doing on that. Am I correct?
I don't believe, no, you have, and it's something that we monitor interdivisionally. My goal would be to make it as transparent as possible, and we want to be obviously able to give you good information and metrics that we can rely on. So part of the end-to-end review is actually building a system of metrics so that we've got more of an open and transparent understanding of how we're all performing, both on the city side and the applicant side. So it's part of the work ahead.
So what you're saying is, in a future update, we will be having access to those?
That would be my goal, is to include.
Because otherwise I'll put a motion forward, because I would love to see that.
Yeah, that would be my goal, is to be more transparent. But I would hesitate to give you numbers now that I couldn't necessarily defend or rely on.
Yeah. And so how often will you be reporting on this project?
I haven't anticipated reporting on the project back to committee again. If you would desire an update, I can give you like an annual update of where we are. I'm happy to do that.
I think this is too much of an important project that I think the committee would just like to, and the public, most importantly, would like to have this. So within the next 2 years, if we could have another couple of updates, and especially for us with these numbers as well.
I think this time next year would be a good time to do that.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. Speakers? Councillor Wong-Tam?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, staff, for bringing this report. I recognize that we all do. The planning process is extremely complicated. It requires the different divisions to work together. Then we have to communicate with our external stakeholders and those partners to make sure everyone's on the same page, and we're all like literally on the same page, looking at the applications at the same time, in order for them to even have dynamic feedback to feed off of one another. Because we know that sometimes when you're you're looking at necessarily just the height and massing, and if that's your only focus, then everybody in the same room speaking that same language is going to say the same thing. But once you start bringing those other divisions together, you do get a much more dynamic conversation where you're going to have a bit more of the back and forth. And I think that's oftentimes what's necessarily, to me, my observation has been missing. So being able to sort of bring those divisions together to work much more collaboratively to actual outcomes, and their time to measurements of when we can anticipate responses in a timely fashion, all of that makes it so much better. What I really appreciate about this report is that it's entirely transparent, which is very different from the development sector. When they come forward, it is not transparent. And I will say this much, is that for all the finger pointing about what the city is not doing for the development review, I think that there's been more opportunities for their input to improve the planning process, and very seldom do I hear even a word of thank you that you have actually done better. That our planning staff have worked really hard with our policy staff, with all the divisional partners to make the system work. When you're asking us to review an application, I don't do the technical review, but when you're asking for comments on an 80-story structure coming down hard at the corner of intersections across the downtown core, and you expect a response in 8 weeks, you gotta be kidding. And then everybody else is asking for exactly the same thing, because you're not the only game in town. And so I think that, you know, by way of by the way our planning staff carry themselves and conduct their business in such a professional, level-headed manner and fair-minded all the time, should be commendable. Should be commended, because it's not necessarily the same level of respect that I see the development industry give our planning staff, because they will never, ever make their process as transparent that we make our process. And I would like to see them go through an interdivisional review to streamline their process, rather than just finger point about what the city doesn't do for them, as if all we are supposed to do is serve their needs, when we should be coming together to collaboratively, proactively build better, sustainable, affordable, inclusive neighborhoods that are livable, as opposed to tell us all the things that we don't do, because this is actually what we are doing. And I'd like to see them now pony up from their side. What are they going to do to eliminate that 9-month gap out of an 18-month review that actually sits on their end? Because we're actually doing our job, so what are they doing? Thank you.
I just want to add a little bit to what Councillor Wong Tam says. I recall actually the genesis of this report. It was some members of the committee in the previous term who, you know, were taking as gospel complaints from the development industry that the city was simply too slow and it was impossible to get something approved in Toronto. And I just simply point to the fact that name somewhere else where we approve more stuff. Somehow we manage in incredible circumstances to move a phenomenal number of projects through the development review process. And the fact that we're trying to make it even better is remarkable. So hats off to you, Mr. Chief Planner, and to all of your staff. You do a fantastic job, and I hope anyone listening to this realizes that you're trying to go from A+ to A++.
Just very quickly, big congratulations and thank you to staff for all the work on this. I remember in my time in city planning, this was just sort of being incubated, and it's great to see it coming back. And I'm looking forward to spending more time going through the report. I recognize that improving our business practices and project management is not, in our operations, is not necessarily the most glamorous work. But I think it is really important, and there's a lot of great recommendations here. And something that we haven't talked a lot about today, but I think is in there, is just the fact that when we make operational improvements, that really enhances our ability to deliver on the policy side as well. Whether that's, with the better data and information that's going to come out of that and enabling us to make better decisions on the policy side, that's huge. And it's quite timely that this is coming back right now, and we're going to be able to leverage that information and those better processes in light of, the province kind of shifting the goalposts on Bill 108 and all of the changes that are really being handed down towards us right now from the provincial context. So, the best thing we can do is arm ourselves with that information. We're going to get better information that's coming out of this that really highlights all the great work that's going on this. Lastly, I will add, we were at the Toronto Urban Design Awards last week or a week or two ago, and it really, those sort of projects, to Councillor Perks and Councillor Wong-Tam's point, you can really see the tangible benefit that city planning makes and our team makes. This division is additive to city building, it's additive to projects, and as you go through these 25 commenting partners and external agencies, and you go through the development review process, we end up with better outcomes. And I think with the enhancements and improvements to operations, that's going to be strengthened, but it really does lead to a better Toronto and better city building outcomes. This is going to strengthen that work, and I'm very grateful. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, I just want to agree with everything that my colleagues have said. And while this report might have been asked for the wrong reasons, it actually has come up with all the right reasons why things are going very well. And sometimes bad things create good things, and this is one of those times. I think it's good if this becomes yearly to look at that kind of best practice and continuous improvement that our chief planner has said that he's overseeing and engendering. And also acknowledge the kind of shifting sands that exist. So Bill 108 and then transportation planning, no longer looking after relief line or anything else. Things are shifting inside, and I know it's hard. It's hard for us. I can imagine how hard it is for staff. So being really clear that you're on the right path, doing well. We understand that every developer believes that their project is the number one and only project that should be looked at by city planning. Often, not everybody, but that generally when they start getting panicky, that's what happens. And I do want to say that when things start going off the rails or panic starts, that planning always steps up to assist to get things back on the rails, because it is possible, and not to have everybody really upset. I think it's very interesting to also look at forecasting types of trends within the city, that could be layered on here. What are those trends? One of them, of course, as we know, as you've looked at, is the kind of clearing out of people with Airbnb, the changes in rental and renovictions, the preponderance of restaurants in places that generally had a nice mix of businesses. And I know they're not all things that you can reach in and fix, but I think of all the divisions that have that big picture, that it's planning that actually has that picture to look and say, here's what trends we're noticing that are positive trends, and here's what trends we're noticing that are difficult trends in the city of Toronto. So that's the only other thing I kind of asked to layer in there, and that the working in my ward, how well economic development and planning work together is really an important thing around jobs, maintaining neighborhoods, maintaining not just employment areas, but approaches to applications, et cetera. To me, that's something that I would like to see perhaps just a little bit more focus on. I'll just harken back to the First Gulf site, which has now, as everybody knows, been purchased by Cadillac Fairview. But the difficulties in understanding why a site like that wouldn't be a big mixed-use site or have a lot of housing and a little bit of employment. To me, that is something that's really important for people to understand, because it's our goal at the city to maintain a certain number of employment areas and a certain number of jobs. So the more we can marry up and focus on those two things together, I think is very helpful. And with that, I just want to thank you for the report and all the work that you do through you, Mr. Chief Planner, to all of your staff for all of their great work. Pardon? Yes, and all the divisions, that's correct. Thank you.
Thank you, and I just want to say a big thank you to staff. I actually think this is quite glamorous work. I think I'm weird. I get really excited about this stuff. I do, because I think there's a lot of he said, she said out there in this world, and I think that this kind of work, especially, and that's why I asked about the technology. If we can put it out there, call them out, put it out there where the application stands, when we're waiting for information from the applicant, be public about it. The fact also that we need a layer of project management in how we deal with the applications, I think it's really important for everybody, for all the departments. Somebody that has that accountability and has that responsibility as well. I think it is important. And at the end of the day, for us to check in to see, how are we doing in staff? Do we need more staff? Do we not need more staff? Do we need technology? What kind of technology? How do we improve our systems? I mean, I think this is extremely important what we're doing, and so congratulations to you. I just wish we could move even faster, but I understand that you're dealing with a lot of things at the same time, and you're definitely doing your best, but I am looking forward to the next updates, because I think this is really important work that you're doing here. Also to allow to focus and to have staff focused on really important work that the city is doing. And the reality is that we have an unprecedented amount of growth, and we have to focus on how to manage that growth. And we need a planning that is focused on doing that. And for that, we need to be well organized and well managed. So thank you, and looking forward for future updates. Okay, and next item, 8.8, response. Oh, sorry, motion to adopt the item. Councillor Perks, all those in favor? That carries. Item 8.8, response to Auditor General's outstanding recommendation regarding Section 37 and Section 45 funds not received in 2008 to 2017 approvals. Councillor Perks, you held the item.
I intended to spend some more time on this, but reading it through, I guess I can just simply ask, you've read the auditor's report, and you can meet all the auditor's recommendations?
Through the chair, with the reporting out to council on this piece, we have addressed all of the Auditor General's 2011 recommendations.
Okay, so, and we're satisfied that we have a good, robust system moving forward, and this problem will diminish and vanish over time.
Through the chair, as a result of the Auditor General's recommendations, we implemented more robust systems, and as a result, we have not seen any non-payments since that time.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Seeing none, speakers? No speakers. Motion to adopt the item. Councillor Perks, all those in favor? That carries. Okay, last item, we need to go back to 8.6, appeals of citywide zoning bylaw 569-2013, request for direction. And will you need to go in camera, Councillor? Okay. So can I get a motion to extend Councillor Brad Bradford to finish the agenda, and a motion to go in camera? Councillor. So extended was moved by Councillor Bradford? Yep, and then Councillor Perks is moving to. Okay, that the Planning and Housing Committee meet in closed session to consider item PH 8.6 as it is about litigation or potential litigation that affects the city or one of its agencies or corporations and contains advice or communications that are subject to solicitor-client privilege. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Okay, clear the room. back in public session. And any speakers on the appeal, item 8.6, appeals of citywide zoning bylaw 569, 2013?
Madam Chair, I can say that staff has satisfied all my questions, and I'll just move the report.
Great. All those in favor? That carries, and that concludes our meeting. Thank you very much, and we'll see you back in a month.